in two parts. The first part is the general principles per se that we follow while treating bone sarcomas. And the second part will be the different types of reconstructions that we do for after resection of bone sarcomas, which will include non-biological as well as biological reconstruction. And I believe that you also had a lecture on radiology of bone sarcomas, so I don't have to go into the details of that as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start off. Uh, Before the, orthopedic oncology is as such a reasonably youngish branch, maybe just about, say, 20 years old or something like that. And that was also thanks to the advent of chemotherapy and good radiation oncology techniques, in fact. In the pre-chemo era, that was in pre-1990s, typically we used to have these bone sarcoma patients presenting to the surgeons pretty late. Most of them would end up having an amputation. Eventually, for the lack of having proper and adequate chemotherapy, most of them would end up having metastasis later on and eventually would die of the disease. However, things started changing a lot after chemotherapy was introduced for bone sarcomas, and that too specifically in osteosarcomas and Ewing sarcomas. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy is now a standard norm. It is a rule for in at least osteo and Ewing sarcomas. In more than 90% of the cases nowadays, we are able to achieve a limb salvage, except for the unfortunate few who are very, very advanced disease. And possible cure, we are actually looking at somewhere around 50 to 55% of our osteo and Ewing sarcoma patients. So we will be primarily covering, oh, I'm sorry, just we will be primarily covering osteosarcomas and Ewing sarcomas and chondrosarcomas. That is what will be the focus of the talk. The metastatic lesions are not the focus of this particular talk because that's a totally different concept and totally different principle. Well, limb salvage started becoming popular in the last 15-20 years because we know that our society per se looks down upon the amputees, and our general public systems are also not very really geared up for helping them out with their situations. As we say that amputation is probably the most merciful of surgeries when it is the only resort, but it is the meanest of surgeries when better alternatives are available. We could treat each and every case of, say, Ewing sarcoma or osteosarcoma with this type of an amputation, but in this young girl, an bony amputation means a loss of a lot of a big loss to that particular patient. And we know that it does not really make a difference in the overall survival or the local recurrence rates. Another difference, as I was talking to you earlier, was that there are now excellent imaging modalities available. We have good quality indigenous processes that are being manufactured at a much cheaper rate. The adjuvant treatment is very effective, including radiation and adjuvant chemotherapy. And our own understanding of surgical techniques has improved quite a lot. In addition to that, we have now a decent amount of OT setups, a decent quality of OT setups everywhere. Our transfusion medicine has grown. We now have a lot of facility like the bone banks, which was not available. All of this has resulted into a good outcome for the extremity sarcoma patients. And I was mentioning earlier, a question that comes to our mind when we think of limb salvage in bone sarcomas is, doing a limb salvage, will it compromise the survival and the local recurrence rate? And in the mid 80s and the early 90s, there were a lot of publications coming in from the European and the Western bone sarcoma treatment centers, which adequately prove that there is no difference, no statistically significant difference between the overall outcomes as well as the local recurrence rates in a case of, say, an osteosarcoma, which was treated with a limb salvage or an amputation at a suitable level, provided that we are going to use adequate and proper chemotherapy and we are going to employ appropriate surgical principles. And because of all these papers that came out around the 1990s, our concepts and our reluctance of doing a limb salvage in bone sarcomas decreased. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy, as I said, is now a rule. in all cases of osteosarcomas and Ewing sarcomas, unless and until there is specific indication of doing an upfront surgery, and it could be anything. We all know that neoadjuvant chemotherapy will be making the limb salvage surgery much easier, and it does by reducing the vascularity of the lesion. It also takes care of the satellite lesions in the reactive zone or the zone of hyperemia that is around the tumor. It helps in forming a pseudocapsule in reducing the blood feeders to the tumor. And of course, in certain cases of pathological fractures in osteo and Ewing sarcomas, it will help in healing of the pathological fractures. More importantly, it also allows us to have an evaluation of the chemotherapeutic response after we resect the entire specimen and send it to the pathologist for examination. And obviously, there is a concept that it probably improves survival by controlling micrometastasis, though it is not yet completely proven. The interesting part of this entire neoadjuvant chemotherapy was that it was initially started because in those times, the customized processes that were required to be inserted in these patients after resection of the tumors were not available off the shelf. So they had to be customized. They used to take about, the companies used to take about 4 to 6 weeks time for manufacturing those processes. And hence, the surgeons thought might as well try and give chemotherapy and see whether we can sort of reduce the size of the tumor. And that's how actually the concept of neoadjuvant chemotherapy started. And you can see that that's an example of an Ewing sarcoma of the proximal humerus. On the left hand side is the X-ray at presentation, and on the right hand side is the X-ray after just giving 2 cycles, neoadjuvant cycles of chemotherapy. And you can see that there is a good reduction in the soft tissue component of the mass. There is a good new bone formation. Obviously, the patient's pain decreases, the soft tissue component decreases. And this is another example, again, an Ewing sarcoma of the mid-third of the fibula. On the left-hand side, in the axial section on the MRI, you can see that it's a huge mass which is affecting the mid-third of the fibula. And after giving chemotherapy, the mass has shrunk to a very big extent. So that's the amount of change that chemotherapy does. There are 2 prognostic factors that we look at when we talk about the prognostic factors in these particular patients of bone sarcomas. And the important ones are the response to chemotherapy that these patients get, and number 2 is the margins of resection that the surgeon has employed. As far as the response to chemotherapy is concerned, I'm sure that you are all aware of the UOSUS grading system and the Pitches grading system, which is used here for osteosarcomas and Ewing sarcomas respectively. Just to tell you quickly, UOS graded these particular chemotherapy responses into 4 grades, where grade 1 was none or minimal response, grade 2 was more than 10% viable tumor, that is less than 90% response, grade 3 is more than 90% necrosis, and grade 4 is 100% necrosis, that is they will not see any viable tumor on the pathom micrographs on the slides when they look at it under the microscope. So grade 4 and grade 3 are considered to be the best type of responses that a patient could get. Similarly, in Ewing sarcomas, there is a Pitches grading system which is employed. Pitches grade 1 means that there is macroscopically positive tumor, grossly viable tumor that is seen. Grade 2 pitchy is there is no macroscopically viable tumor, but there is microscopically viable tumor, and grade 3 is that there is no viable tumor at all. So that is used in cases of Ewing sarcomas. That was one thing that was important, that is important prognostically. And the second thing that is important prognostically is the margins that we use while doing a resection. And we use wide margins. So when we talk of wide margins, we have to understand what exactly a wide margin is. So for that, you have to understand the biology of sarcomas. Sarcomas, unlike carcinomas, are they grow by centrifugal expansion. So if that's the cross section of a limb, the blue one, and the red one is a tumor that is growing inside that particular extremity, it keeps on growing. It has a wide zone of hyperemia around it. That just indicates that there is a lot of edema and there is a lot of neovascularization in this particular area. And there could be small microsatellite deposits of tumor cells in this particular area. So you have to excise this entire zone of hyperemia with a good normal tissue cover, either soft tissue cover or bone or maybe periosteum or fascia or whatever. But unless and until you remove it in this fashion, the patient stands a high risk of local recurrence. So this particular resection, if you follow the dotted black line, that's what we call as a wide local excision. And this particular concept was given by William Enneking, and I believe Dr. Anand Raja has spoken to you about types of excisions, which could be intralesional, which is not done in bone sarcomas, marginal excision, where only the tumor is resected without taking care of the zone of hyperemia, again is not done in bone sarcomas because that has very high risk of local recurrence. What we employ is a wide excision where we keep an adequate cuff of soft tissue muscle around a particular extraosseous tumor component. And on the bone side, we keep adequate length of the bone as a margin so that chances of local recurrence decrease. And the fourth type of resection that William Enneking described was a radical resection, which was employed earlier, like say an amputation or a disarticulation, which is not used nowadays or used very, very rarely in some select cases. And this particular gentleman by the name of Kawaguchi from Japan, he sort of revolutionized the concept of curative margins, where he spoke about the importance of quality of margins and not just the quantity of margins. So if you imagine in a distal end of the femur, having a 3 centimeter margin or a 5 centimeter of margin in the popliteal fossa is simply impossible because the neurovascular bundle is so close to the bone over there. So Kawaguchi was the first one, and his group were the first one to describe that it's not just the quantity of the margin, it's the quality of the margin that is also important. So you may not be really 3 centimeters away from the tumor, you may be just a centimeter away from the tumor. But if you have one growth plate in between, or if you have a cortex in between, or you have a cartilage in between, then that means that you are technically 3 to 3.5 centimeters away. So nowadays, what we do is that if we have these particular barriers, we sort of calculate the margin status, quantitate it using the quality of the margin. So when we talk of resection and with adequate margin in bone sarcoma, what do we mean? We mean that we, as far as the medullary extent of the tumor is concerned, which is this, we have to be at least 3 centimeters away from the proximal most extent of the tumor, which is typically gauged by the T1 weighted image on the MRI scan, and we remain at least 3 centimeters away. Now here the tumor has this particular extraosseous soft tissue component, and we have to have at least one healthy muscle which is covering that particular soft tissue component so that that entire zone of hyperemia is taken care of. And obviously distally, if you have a growth plate or a cartilage which is separating the tumor from the distal area, then you're actually having a good margin. So this technically may not be 5 centimeters away, but you have left an entire normal muscle on the soft tissue component. It means that you have a margin of about equivalent to about 3 to 4 centimeters. Similarly, if the tumor is reaching right up to here and then you're taken out the tumor along with the cartilage as one of the covers, then again you are technically about 3 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters away. The same thing holds true for marginal excision at the neurovascular bundle, because if you take care of the sheath and leave the sheath on the tumor and dissect the neurovascular bundle away, then that means that you are technically about 1.5 to 2 centimeters away from the tumor, when actually you are only a few millimeters away from the tumor. And this particular study got published in CRR way back by Kawaguchi's group, and it was proven that it is pretty safe to resect the tumors accordingly. And that's the reason why I said that more than 90-95% of our patients nowadays end up having a reasonably good or a proper limb salvage surgery. Now, when we talk of treating these particular bone sarcomas patients, especially the osteosarcomas and hemic sarcomas, it is always a multimodality management, and you all must have been a part of the multidisciplinary group meetings where all of us get together, the diagnostic team and therapeutic team, including the surgeons, the medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, and sometimes the plastic surgeons and vascular surgeons. And basically, we have to come together to decide what is the right modality, what should be the right combination, and what should be the right sequence of administrating that particular combination, and what should be the right time of doing the surgical excision or a particular type of treatment that we are going to give to the patient. So again, it's a team approach. I, as an individual, I'm not going to take the decision on my own, but the entire team will take that decision. Now, when we talk of limb salvage surgeries, there are certain deciding factors which will decide whether a patient is a good candidate for a limb salvage surgery or not. And that depends upon the staging of the patient. And staging of the patient in osteosarcomas and hemic sarcomas are typically done by doing local MRI scans along with the X-rays, local CTs, the chest CT scans, or a bone scan, or a PET scan in place of CT chest and bone scan. So if a patient is metastatic, he obviously carries a poor prognosis. So you would probably think about doing a limb salvage in such a patient. Another thing that you have to look at is how salvageable the limb is, whether surgically you are going to be able to give that patient an appropriate margin and at the same time leave behind adequate muscles along with their nerve supply so that the joint functions in a stable fashion, in an appropriate fashion. And obviously in Indian setup and in private setups, we have to give a thought about what's the socioeconomic status of the patient because of the costs involved in the various surgical and chemotherapeutic and radiation managements. So who is an proper candidate for limb salvage surgery? Well, the candidate where you are able to achieve a wide margin and appropriate margin without contaminating or without going into the tumor. A case where you will be able to give an adequate function in the salvaged limb, and a case where the patient is going to complete the entire adequate chemotherapy and radiation, whatever you have prescribed to him. These are the cases who are the right candidates for doing a limb salvage surgeries. So basically, we are trying to achieve a balance between saving function in the affected extremity versus the disease control. But we have to remember that under no circumstances, the control of the disease has to be compromised in order to save the function. That is going to be disastrous as far as the local recurrence is going to be concerned and may have a very big bearing on the overall survival of the patient also. You all must have seen very big tumor cases presenting to our OPDs, to our clinics. Well, whatsoever we may want to do, we will not be able to do limb salvage surgeries in these type of cases where there are very big tumors. We can try to do our best, but we have to be realistic in setting goals. And all these three cases that I have shown you, on the right hand side is an Ewing sarcoma of the forearm. In the middle is a chondrosarcoma of the distal end of the femur, with multiple surgical procedures being done on her. And on the right hand side is an osteosarcoma of the proximal humerus and the scapula, which is a very, very big mass. And on all these cases, limb salvage is not possible. So what are the contraindications of doing a limb salvage surgery? The contraindications, the strict or rather the absolute contraindications are only two. One is encasement of a major motor nerve. That is one of the most important absolute contraindications. If a sciatic is involved, or in the upper limb, if the median and the ulnar are involved, then you can't think of doing a limb salvage surgery. And the second absolute contraindication is there are inadequate muscles which are left behind after resection. So you can take out everything and there's nothing for the joint to function. There is no muscle, there is no nerve left behind for the joint to function. Then that type of a reconstruction is of no use. The other contraindications are, I would say, relative contraindications, and these particular relative contraindications are involvement of a major vessel, because that is taken care of by doing resection and reconstruction of the vessel. Sometimes infection may be a relative contraindication that again can be taken care of. We see a lot of cases of badly placed biopsy scars. So that sometimes becomes a relative contraindication. And pathological fractures. Not all pathological fractures mean that you have to treat these particular sarcoma patients with amputation. Most of them can be salvaged by giving chemotherapy, allowing the pathological fracture to heal, and still achieving an adequate function and acceptable function. So typically what happens is that when we do a limb salvage surgery, the photo that you see is a distal end femur osteosarcoma resection. Typically there could be a gap of anywhere between, say, 8 centimeters to 30 centimeters or 32 centimeters that is left behind. And this particular gap has to be reconstructed using some modality so that the patient is able to use that particular limb adequately. What we expect is that whatever reconstruction we plan should be stable, it should be mobile, and as far as possible, it should be durable for a long time so that the patient doesn't have to undergo repeat surgical procedure for the same type of reconstruction. And then now there are various types of reconstruction modalities that we can talk of. One of the most common ones is an customized endoprosthesis, which we will see. We use customized endoprosthesis, either indigenously manufactured or imported ones, to reconstruct the defects. The second option could be an arthrodesis, that is fusion of the joint by using various techniques. It could be a rotation plasty in a very young child where there is a lot of bone growth that is expected, limb length discrepancy that is expected. and there are no proper implants or processes to take care of reconstructing the defects in these young children. Another very interesting upcoming option is of extracorporeal irradiation and reimplantation of the same affected bone. Or nowadays, some centers are employing cryotherapy. They are treating the excised part of the bone with liquid nitrogen and reimplanting again. Some centers are also doing autoclaving and reimplantation or doing an allograft processes composite if they have a facility of bone bank. And there is, just to complete the list, there is an option of osteoarticular allograft that can be used. But typically, this is not used in India anywhere because we don't have cadaveric bone banks. So what type of reconstruction is to be used mainly depends upon the age of the patient, the site of the disease, the demands of the patient and the family, and obviously what's the expertise of your center, what is the infrastructure available over there, and the patient's finances to a certain extent. Mega processes for reconstruction is one of the best options and the most commonly employed options, especially around the knee and in the hip in the proximal femur, because it gives you a stable, mobile, and durable joint. There is a good functional outcome, and you will see some outcome pictures. And you can continue with the adjuvant chemotherapy and radiation if required in these particular patients without having much of an issue. There are different types. On the left hand side, you can see some imported mega processes. On the right hand side, you can see that some indigenously manufactured low cost processes. Most of them function well, even the indigenously manufactured ones function well. Typically, even if they give you 4 to 5 years time so as to decide whether the patient is a survivor or not, that should be good enough. Because then later on, if it comes to a revision of that particular joint, then you could still go in and put in an important mega process if the patient is a survivor. This is one of the most commonest types of mega processes that we use for reconstruction of bone defects after sarcoma resections around the joint and around the knee in particular, because that is the one common area where you will get to see maximum number of bone sarcoma cases. This is one such example. A distal femur osteosarcoma has been treated with 3 cycles of neoadjuvant chemotherapy, responded reasonably well. And here it is, we have taken it out. You can see the specimen on the top right hand side photograph. You can see that there is a good amount of soft tissue that has been excised. 3 centimeters of bone has been taken out as a margin along with the bone. Distally, the disease is a little away from the articular cartilage, so we are safe over here. And that's how proper resection and reconstruction has to be done. And this is the X-ray, how it will look for a distal femur resection, and I'll see whether the videos are working. Oh, I'm afraid they are not. Anyways, so we allow about 90 degrees of knee range of movement in these particular patients, and these patients have a nearly normal functional outcome. Yeah, similarly in proximal tibia cases, we can resect the entire tumor and replace it with prosthesis. That's one such case where you can see that the patient is able to have a good almost near normal gait, though you can see that the limb girth is a little different, and that's the knee range of movement that the patient has got. Sometimes the disease may be intra-articular, as you can see in the MRI over here, and in these type of cases you have to do what we call as an extra-articular resection. We take out the entire joint along with the distal femur and the proximal tibia, and that's the sort of an composite prosthesis that we can use to replace this kind of a defect. A case of proximal femur chondrosarcoma, where we have taken out the entire proximal femur, resected it out completely, and then reconstructed using mega prosthesis. This is how it will look like. So here you can see that we have done an intra-articular resection for an intra-articular disease with a good soft tissue cover over there, and a reconstruction using a mega prosthesis, and the patient does well at long-term follow-up as well. We do get sometimes certain cases where a pathological fracture is inadvertently nailed, as was in this case of an osteosarcoma. And typically in these cases, we sometimes have to take out the entire femur, and the modular prosthesis allows us to do a total femur kind of a reconstruction where the entire bone and the hip joint and the knee joint are completely replaced. So they don't have as good a function as the prosthesis around the knee, but it is much better as compared to a patient of a hip disarticulation or an external hemipelvectomy or an hindquarter amputation. And this is how it will look on the scanogram X-ray. Proximal humerus is another common site where you can get osteosarcomas and Ewing sarcomas, especially in the late teens. And these are the cases again where you can give proper neoadjuvant chemotherapy, resect the tumor, and reconstruct using a prosthesis. Now, in the proximal femur, the difference is that most of the times we have to resect the axillary nerve and quite a good amount of deltoid along with it, and that leads to a complete loss of shoulder range of movement in these particular cases. But the elbow and the hand function remains good, and the patients typically do much better. So these particular processes in the proximal humerus keep on functioning only as a spacer, but that is much better compared to a shoulder disarticulation. And obviously, if the distal humerus is involved, you could use a distal humerus prosthesis, or if the entire humerus is involved, you can also, like the total femur, you can consider doing a total humerus reconstruction as well. Now, megaprocesses, intercalary megaprocesses is also an option for intercalary disease. Intercalary means that in between the two joints, the top and the bottom. And here you can see that that was an osteosarcoma in the mid-third of the femur, which had a pathological fracture. Treated with chemotherapy, we allowed it to gum up a little bit, and then it was excised completely and reconstructed using an intercalary prosthesis, which actually replaces the segment in the middle part of the femur. So this is another option. Or sometimes in certain cases like this, where for some reason you're not able to put in a prosthesis or an intercalary prosthesis, we do an nail cement plate spacer kind of a reconstruct, which is this combination of K-nail inside with plate and screws, and then the cavity is packed in form of with bone cement, and that gives a reasonably stable reconstruct. These were the non-biological reconstruction options that we were looking at, the commonly used ones, and now we will go on to see what are the biological reconstruction options. And obviously, the type of the disease and the extent of the disease also dictates as to what type of reconstruction you would do. Now, this particular middle-aged gentleman came to us with a very big scapular mass, and it was a scapular chondrosarcoma. Fortunately, it was not involving the scapular glenoid, and it was only in the lower half. So we could treat him using just a partial scapulectomy, saving his supraspinatus muscle and the glenoid. Obviously, in chondrosarcoma cases, chemotherapy and radiation are not going to be useful. And just by saving the glenoid and the supraspinatus, you can see that the patient has got a near normal, not completely normal, but a near normal shoulder abduction and range of movement. That's a case of a distal fibula Ewing sarcoma, which has been treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Resection done, and typically we now like to not reconstruct the lateral malleolus. We just use Prolene mesh and some local tendinous sleeves so as to give the ankle a bit of stability. And the patients can do everything. They can squat, they can walk, they can do their activities of daily living without much of an issue. So these are some cases where no reconstruction is required, but again, that is going to be dictated by where the tumor is located and how much of a resection you are going to need is going to be needed to be done. That's a very classical X-ray picture of what we call as an parosteal osteosarcomas. So parosteal osteosarcomas are low-grade osteosarcomas where chemotherapy is not employed. They have very good cure rates, more than 90% 5-year survival. And this is the typical location of parosteal osteosarcoma, the distal posterior cortex of the femur. Usually there is no intramedullary invasion, although here you can see that there is some amount of intramedullary invasion, and the patient has been treated with hemicortical resection using a dual approach. And reconstruction in this particular case was done using an allograft and an internal fixation on the plate and the screws. And the patient, since the knee joint is spared, the patient has a very good knee range of movement, and she's able to walk around very well, near normal function. In the upper limb also, sometimes biological reconstructions work very well. That was a case of an chondrosarcoma involving the mid-third of the humerus, a very unusual location and unusual age, but it was a grade 2 chondrosarcoma. And then this was treated again by what we call as an intercalary resection and reconstruction using a vascular graft. So I involved a vascular surgeon, a plastic surgeon rather, to resect the fibula from the same side along with the vascular pedicle and implant it and suture to the local artery and vein. And at a long-term follow-up, the patient gets a hypertrophied fibula with a near normal function in his elbow and shoulder. A case of osteosarcoma in the mid part of the femur has been resected. Reconstruction was done using only a vascularized fibula. As you can see over here, that's the vascular pedicle been sutured to the main popliteal artery and vein. And the patient typically goes on to have a very good hypertrophied fibula. He had fractured it post fall, but it went on to heal very well. And you can see that the patient has got a good gait, a good cosmetic appearance in the limb. He's able to do everything: squat, sit cross-legged, and do activities of daily living, whatever he wants to do. Adamantinoma of the tibia. Here the advantage in the lower leg is that you have the fibula by the side, so you can do a procedure known as tibialization of fibula. Just move the fibula in the defect. I also used a contralateral non-vascularized fibula for filling, rather enhancing the structural stability of the reconstruct. And the patient did go on to have a fantastic function. He's able to move rather his knee joint in the full range of movement and has a near normal gait. In young kids, especially, it's a very big problem the way you can sort of reconstruct these particular defects. Now, this was a very young child. He was only 4 years old when we operated on him. This was an Ewing sarcoma, but you can see that in both the proximal epiphysis and the distal epiphysis in the tibia, the disease is pretty away. So what we did was a fascial sparing. We spared the growth plate, a fascial sparing intercalated resection, and did an extracorporeal radiotherapy, radiated this particular mid segment and then put it back after removing the extraosseous part of the tumor. And you can see on the follow-up x-rays that the bone has healed up completely well over there. And you can see in the follow-up x-rays that the bone is growing from both sides, the proximal and the distal side as well. And you can see that the patient has got a very good function. He's able to move around, he's able to jump, he's able to sit cross-legged. And this particular video was just 6 months after the surgery, and he's gone on to have a very good functional outcome as well. Another patient of intercalary resection in the femur this time, and you can see that she also goes on to have a very good functional outcome. She's able to do all the activities, the high impact activities, has a good function in the knee, and goes on to have almost a near normal activity. In certain cases, you can combine the extracorporeal radiotherapy with the vascularized fibula sort of a reconstruct, and that has been done in this patient of distal femur osteosarcoma, where the radiated bone, extracorporeally radiated bone, and the vascularized fibula are inserted together into the defect and fixed with suitable type of surface fixation. And you can see that at a longer follow-up, the entire bone has beautifully fused to the femur, and the bone scan done at 5 years after surgery showing that the entire thing is vascular, and the patient goes on to have a very good functional outcome and gait at a later date. Biological reconstruction in children is a bit of an challenge because the bone sizes are small, and rotation plasty is a very good option, a very good biological option to sort of reconstruct defects around the knee in kids as small as 6 years old and 8 years old, because prosthesis might not be a very good option for them. So rotation plasty is the procedure which allows the ankle to substitute as the knee. We shorten the leg, fuse the tibia to the femur, and see to it that at skeletal maturity, the ankle joint comes to the level of the opposite knee joint. The remaining part is made good by using an artificial prosthesis, and the ankle then functions as the knee. As he dorsiflexes the ankle, the knee flexes. So that's how the rotation plasty works. And that's one of the videos of a patient of rotation plasty. That's how it will look, and that's how it will function. This particular boy has just been fitted with a prosthetic limb, and that's why there is a little bit of awkwardness in the gait. But the advantage here is that the patient is walking on his own foot. So it's a better psychological outcome. The gait is better than Naboni amputation because you have a longer stump. There is no phantom pain because you have not resected the nerves. It compensates for the limb length discrepancy because initially you keep the leg longer than the opposite knee, and then it sort of makes up. Children adapt pretty well to the processes, and most of the times when the tibia unites to the femur, it's a single procedure. You don't have to repeat the procedures as you have to do that in cases of megaprosthesis or the other non-biological reconstruction. I've shown you most of the commonly used types of reconstruction modalities in bone sarcomas, but all these surgeries are not without complications. There are a lot of complications that can happen, and I'm just going to enumerate a few just to complete the sort of a to give you the real picture, complete picture. There could be an insertion fracture while putting in the prosthesis. As you can see, the condyle over here has fractured. There could be a vascular injury if the extraosseous soft tissue component is very big and vessels are stuck to the region. And sometimes you may have to willingly resect the vessels and reconstruct using either a vein graft or an artificial PTFE graft. Wound necrosis may occur in certain cases, and you may have to be ready to freshen the edges and do a flap if required. Most of these patients will require post-op adjuvant chemotherapy that will lead to an immunocompromised status, and almost 10% chances of periprosthetic infections are there, and one has to be accustomed or used to dealing with this type of complications as well, because once this happens, this is one of the most disastrous complications, and the patients may have to undergo repeated procedures to take care of the infection. Try to wash off the infection by doing multiple wound washes, putting in antibiotics. But if it doesn't work, then the only option is to remove the prosthesis and put in what this is like a nail cement plate spacer. Periprosthetic fractures can be one of the complications. This was a humerus fracture at the tip of the prosthesis, and you may have to go down and fix that particular fracture. Aseptic loosening, a loosening where the cement just loosens up after 10 years, 12 years, or 15 years time, and without any presence of infection can also be one of the complications. And typically we have to counsel and tell the patients that at the end of say maybe 12, 15 years, you will have to undergo a revision procedure if this particular thing happens. Implant breakage is one of the commonest complications if you are not going to use a good quality prosthesis, and sometimes you'll have to go down and revise the entire aseptic loosening can also occur in these type of intercalary implants, and you may have to be ready and counsel the patient to revise the entire reconstruct again. Whatever type of reconstruction you do, biological or non-biological, in the upper limb or the lower limb, local recurrence is seen in about 10 to 15% of these particular cases, and this will have to be dealt with appropriately. Most of the times, if you are not able to take care of the local recurrence on its own, you may have to do an amputation. If you are able, if it's a very superficial local recurrence, you may just go down and resect it. Pulmonary metastases are seen in about 40 to 50% of osteosarcoma and hemicrania cases, even though they are non-metastatic at presentation. And you might be aware that if there are 3 or 4 pulmonary mets, then we may go down, treat the patient with pulmonary metastectomy. If there are any more than any more metastasis than say 5 or 6 or 8 in the patient, then it obviously is a poor prognostic factor, and typically they would be treated with a palliative intent or palliative chemotherapy. There can be complications in biological reconstruction also, fractures of the transplanted fibula with implant failure, it will have to be revised. Sometimes there could be angular deformities because of unequal growth in the adjoining joint or the adjoining growth plate. There could be limb length discrepancy, and this has to be addressed by surgical procedures on the contralateral side, on the opposite side, by doing a fusion of the growth plates in that particular leg. Complications like these may occur in biological reconstruction. The patient had a very high velocity accident, road traffic accident. He broke his femur, but fortunately, since the fibula was vascular over there, we could just put in a longer plate and screws, and the patient went on to have a good union at the fracture site. Delayed union and non-unions are also common complications in biological reconstructions, which has to be dealt with, and you have to have that adequate experience to deal with the complications, and not just have the experience for doing the resection and reconstruction. So in most of the cases, as I said, with good case selection, good surgical skill and experience, with proper planning on the MRI and preoperatively, by using multidisciplinary team, using the improved technology that's available, and advances in adjuvant modalities, both chemo and radiation, we are able to give the patients a good function and a good decent outcome. And limb salvage is now possible in majority of the patients. I think that was all that needed to be covered. I have tried to give you a bird's eye view sort of regarding reconstruction options and treatment and principles of treating bone sarcomas. So if there are any questions, then we will take those now.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
there are
So let's have a look at the chat box. How does management change if bone marrow is involved? I believe the question is in respect to Ewing sarcoma cases. So typically in Ewing sarcoma, the staging is in the form of either a CT chest, a bone scan, and a bone marrow aspiration biopsy, or a PET scan in place of these three. And if the bone marrow is involved, obviously the patient is treated as a metastatic patient. And we do analyze, we do assess at the end of neoadjuvant chemotherapy how the patient has responded. And if the patient has responded very well, we would go on to do a limb salvage, assuming that the extremities are involved by the Ewing sarcoma, and then treat the patient as a regular patient, as a non-metastatic patient. So I don't think involvement of the bone marrow would change the intention of local management. Probably the only thing I would add and tell the patients and the patient's relatives is that the prognosis might be poorer as compared to a patient with no bone marrow involvement in an Ewing sarcoma. I hope that was clear. Experience in extracorporeal radiotherapy, difference between extracorporeal radiotherapy and using the prosthesis. Okay, so the main difference between using the prosthesis and extracorporeal radiotherapy is that typically prosthesis is used for a periarticular disease. So if a disease is near the joint, it's most likely going to be treated by reconstructing using a megaprosthesis. And extracorporeal radiotherapy is typically more commonly going to be used in cases where the tumor affects the mid part of the bone. So in the mid part of the femur or mid part of the tibia, middle third, if it's involved, and you are able to save the proximal and the distal joint, then an extracorporeal radiotherapy is typically used. Now, obviously, the two modalities are very different. I did mention about some complications that could occur. So the pros and cons are different. Obviously, whenever you are able to save a joint, it makes a big difference in the functional outcome. So functional outcome is typically much better in intercalary resection and doing reconstruction, biological or semi-biological, as I would say. And reconstructions with prosthesis give an immediately good function, immediate return to activity in the post-operative period. But on a long term, it's going to require revision surgeries at a later date. An intercalary resection and reconstruction, if it unites, once it unites, it's going to require hardly any reconstruction or repeat surgeries at a later date. So, yeah, next question is how to manage the long length of vessels in rotationplasty. Okay, so that's a nice question. Typically, some centers, typically in the West, they would actually resect the vessels and do a anastomosis. But we don't do that. Most of us typically prefer, like, we coil the nerve and keep it in the wound defect and then cover it with soft tissues. We just coil the vessels together along with the nerve, and we create a pocket between the muscles, and we keep the vessels and the nerve coiled up inside that particular area. You have to be very careful so as to not have a very tight closure in that particular region, because then the patient may end up having a vascular deficit and you may have to sort of reopen the wound again. Can you describe options for treatment of bone sarcoma around ankle joint and distal end of tibia? Yeah. So again, this area is one area where there is hardly any muscle cover. So difficult area to do a very good reconstruction. I would hope to have a patient with purely intraosseous disease if it were a distal end of tibia, say osteosarcoma or Ewing sarcoma. But we rarely get to see these particular cases, because if it's a purely intraosseous disease or a disease where there is hardly any extraosseous component, then I would just resect that particular distal end of the tibia, do a tibialization of fibula, use additional fibula strut over there, and do an ankle arthrodesis using a plate. And that would function reasonably well. But however, if the sarcoma is large, there is a very big extraosseous soft tissue component, then typically most of these patients would end up having an below-knee amputation. Use of megaprosthesis in a distal tibia sarcoma, primary bone sarcoma, is pretty rare, because as I mentioned, there is no soft tissue cover. This area is prone to infections, and typically they will land up with complications more often than as compared to the patients with the processes around the knee. So that was regarding tumor in the, or rather a sarcoma in the distal tibia. Mm, Manish is asking, in planning for resection for limb salvage surgery, resection length to be decided by pre-chemo MRI or post-chemo MRI, and whether there is any role of bone scan to decide for resection length. Okay, so bone scan is, I'll take the second part first. Bone scan is has got a very, if you see the images of bone scan, they are not very sharp. So the contrast and the quality of the image is not very great to decide the resection length. So we don't use the bone scan to decide the resection length. We just use the bone scan to see whether the patient has got multifocal disease or skeletal metastasis or not. Resection length is typically decided by the pre-chemo MRI most of the times, except for certain situations where you have a very good response and you have a very major structure like a joint or like a growth plate to spare. So only in those particular specific cases where you have to decide whether to spare a joint or not, probably I would rely more on the post-chemo MRI. But most of the times, more often, I would give importance to the pre-chemo MRI. But this is regarding the intramedullary extent. If we are talking about the soft tissue extent, as I was explaining, since it's a centrifugal growth in a sarcoma, that is not a very big problem because the muscles are not infiltrated by the tumor. In most of our cases, we have noticed that the length of involvement of the marrow on the MRI scan in a T1 weighted image doesn't change much. So that is not something that is going to drastically change. So thankfully, we don't have to sort of alter our plan a lot based on as compared to the pre-chemo MRI or the post-chemo MRI. Typically, as far as the length of marrow involvement is concerned, it doesn't change much. The girth of the disease, the diameter of the disease, and the radius of the disease may change, it may reduce, but that is not an issue because any which ways it doesn't infiltrate into the muscle. It just pushes the muscle to the periphery. Okay, so which bone scan is better, fluoride or I believe it's technetium that we are talking about. So basically what we do if we are talking about a bone scan is it's a technetium Mendronet bone scan, 3-phase bone scan. Fluoride PET is typically preferred if we are going to use a PET scan. We have now realized that FDG PET is not a very great way or rather reliable way of staging osteosarcomas, especially. For Ewing's, it's a completely different thing. So if we are to talk about doing a bone scan, it has to be a technetium bone scan, 3-phase. And if you could get a fluoride PET done, then yes, in an osteosarcoma, fluoride PET will have a better sensitivity. I think we have addressed most of the questions. Any other questions? Okay. All right. I think we have covered. Anything that was not very clear? Anything that you want me to repeat? You can unmute yourself and then ask me the question. Okay, so the next question is what is a turn-up plasty? So typically turn-up or turn-down plasties are cases where cases of arthrodesis, which are employed in either a distal femur or a proximal tibia tumor. Turn-up is typically used for a distal femur tumor that has been resected. So there is a defect in the distal femur and a proximal tibia is unaffected. So what we do is either in a sagittal plane or in the coronal plane, we split the tibia into half, rotate one half of that proximal tibia, whatever defect is there in the femur, that much of a tibia we rotate upwards either in a coronal plane or a sagittal plane, and then fuse the knee joint using a long plate and screw or maybe a long intramedullary nail. So that is what you mean by a turn-up-plasty. It was very commonly done, say 20-25 years back. Nowadays, we don't use it. What we use is typically either allografts or we use vascularized fibula, or we use a combination of allograft and vascularized fibula for doing a knee arthrodesis. Knee arthrodesis is typically not very highly accepted by the patients because it's a very morbid procedure where the patient is not able to bend the knee at all, and sometimes it becomes very difficult for them. They cannot squat, they cannot sit cross-legged, they cannot travel in our public transport vehicles, and that becomes a very big handicap for them. So knee arthrodesis is not something which we very commonly do. Only in a select cases, after proper counseling of patient, it is employed. Okay, which generation expandable endoprosthesis you prefer in growing children in your practice, since cost of third generation is very high? Well, if it has to be an expandable prosthesis, I'm afraid and I'm sorry to say that we don't have very good quality indigenous prosthesis which are reliable enough from the quality perspective that are available. So we have to depend upon the good quality imported prosthesis where the expansion is either minimally invasive or it is totally non-invasive. And yes, I'm afraid the cost is very high, and typically we end up counseling the patients to undergo a rotation plasty rather than an expandable prosthesis. But unfortunately, the indigenously manufactured expandable prostheses have very high complication rate. Typically, I would use them only if I have to tide over the first 4 or 5 years. But if I have to take up the patients for surgery or for revision for implant failure in the first 2-3 years itself, then it's not a very good processes that I'm looking at. All right. Okay. Any more questions? Anything that was not clear? Okay, all right. Okay, so then thank you very much. Take care, stay safe, everyone. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. And thanks to Dr. Akshay Tiwari. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It was wonderful and a very nice talk, lucid presentation. And we look forward to more learning from you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you very much.
Ganpati Bappa Moria.
Ganpati Bappa Moria. Bye. Good night.